Hello, BookTube. Sorry for the late upload times. I'm not even sure that these will upload today. They might upload on Sunday. And the culprit, once again, is unbelievably gorgeous weather. Just unbelievably gorgeous weather. The whole afternoon and early evening on the couch with the window open and the breezes blowing through the tree and the dog sleeping right next to me and the smell of the greenery and the birds chirping. Literally, it sounds ridiculous, but it was all there. It was all there. I was completely comfortable, just sprawled out on my little couch, just reading and writing. So I didn't think about videos until it was too late in the day. But one thing that I did before I just sat like a sponge on the couch like that was to go out. I actually went out. I went to the Brattle Book Shop here in Boston this morning, first thing. And for those of you who are new to the channel, the Brattle Book Shop is a used bookstore here in Boston that is like no other used bookstore that I've ever been to. It's 3 stories. It's an old building in downtown Boston. It's 3 stories. The first 2 are crammed with used books of all kinds, reasonably priced. 3rd floor is antiques and collectible books that start at a higher price tag and go way up depending on what you want to do. But it's a full service used bookstore in that sense, in that if you go in, you can either get a used book that you might be looking for, or you can get a collectible item either for yourself or for somebody else. You don't have to go off-site to do that. And there's also front and center, as soon as you walk in the Brattle, there's a buying table, which is the heart and soul of what makes the Brattle so interesting, is that they are constantly buying. They're constantly adding to their stock, so you never know. It's something different every day. Lots of different things every day. But in addition to that layout of the shop, the lot next door, which is the whole floor plan of another building, is empty. And the Brattle fills it with sale lot books, $1, $3, and $5 books. And unlike a lot of used bookstores that have like a barrow outside or something like that, the Brattle doesn't usually put junk out there at all. It's usually excess or pleasant finds or stuff that doesn't tend to sell inside the shop. All of those decisions are made at the buying table, and they result in just a wonderland for bookish people. That the sale lot is just a wonderland. It's open in almost all weathers. It's open in all seasons. So I used to go there every day, even when it was freezing cold. I don't do that anymore. I haven't been in quite some time. I haven't been to the Brattle in quite some time. But I have often maintained, and I have demonstrated to young people that I bring there. Right now, none of my young people are bookish in the slightest. But I have brought bookish young people there, and I've told them ahead of time, for a $20 bill, you will be able to get a knapsack entirely full of books for your collection, and you won't have to be stinting on quality. You'll be able, for $20, if you give it time in that sale lot, it's hundreds of books. You will be able to get a whole bunch of stuff, all of which looks, doesn't look used. All of which looks perfectly new. And I've done it for people like that. I've taken people my own challenge when it comes to that, and I've fallen out of the habit of going to the Brattle lately. Mainly for the reason that I started this video with, because when I'm on that couch and I've got Frida with me and I've got lots of interesting work to do and I've got the whole sensorium of the beautiful early summer world, and there's nobody in the building and there's nobody on the street, and I know that Frida's going to be momentarily upset if I leave her, because she doesn't really like to go on the subway, so I don't bring her to the Brattle. And it wouldn't feel right anyway to bring her to the Brattle, because even if she put up with the subway, which I think she would probably do, she's a big girl now, once she got there and saw all the people in the sale lot, she would want to run up and make every one of them pat her. She screams to demand attention. She yells at people. And I think it's adorable, and a lot of dog people do, but I can't guarantee that everybody in the sale lot would think it's adorable. And I wouldn't want my time in the sale lot infringed on that way, so I don't do it either. And that means I have to leave her, and she doesn't like that, and neither do I. So the combination of those 2 things have just kept me away from extraneous trips. There was a time, many decades, where I did not think the Brattle was extraneous. So I just buckled on my big boy pants and went out today. I went out first thing this morning. It helped that I had books to bring to give to members of the staff, but it also, I spent so long since I was there, I wanted to see what I would find, and I found a whole bunch of books, and I want to show them to you. And one of the things about the Brattle that I've always noticed that I love is something called a Brattle find, a real find. It's not just the Brattle. If you go to any used bookstore, you'll know what I mean. you'll see things that you see all the time, and you'll see things that you see some of the time, and then every once in a while you'll see a genuine find, not only something that you don't see that often, but something that you genuinely want. Those moments are wonderful. They are absolutely wonderful. And I can usually count, when I go to the Brattle, I can usually count on finding something, on a Brattle find. But today, probably because I hadn't been there in a while, I found many Brattle finds. I found many things that made me squeal a high-pitched pip of delight when I saw them. I'm going to save the best of those for the end. So we're going to start with the slightly more commonplace stuff, or the stuff that I got just because it intrigues me. And if a book costs $1, you can indulge in a momentary bit of intrigue without any expectation that you're going to have to hold on to it for your life. You know how it is when you go to a new bookstore, for instance, a retail bookstore, and you spend $20 on a book. You kind of feel that weight hanging on you. You kind of think, well, this was $20, so I can't just, if it doesn't appeal to me in the first 16 pages, I have to keep trying, because I'm not going to just discard it. That's such a waste of money. That feeling goes away when you're dealing with books that are $1. When you're dealing with cart after cart after cart after cart of books that are all $1 in all kinds of different descriptions, and none of them junk, no outmoded electrical codes or anything like that, you can indulge your curiosity. So the first few of these books are rebuys. They're doubles. They're things I've already read and just want to reread. Just want to put them back in, or put them in this room. The first one, for instance, is one I will pick and choose. I will reread bits and pieces of it, but the book itself is going in this room, and that's, believe it or not, John Updike. This is Hugging the Shore, which is an early collection of essays by John Updike, bookish type stuff. See the 2 columns of authors that are written about in this book, because Updike did that whenever he could. At the drop of a hat, he did. So he routinely, at the New Yorker and elsewhere, and at his home, he would routinely get a stream of review copies, just like you see on this channel, from everybody in the world. Not only people that he'd had previous dealings with and editors who knew would pay him, but also anybody, authors who would just send him a book and hope that he dipped into it, liked it, finished it, and wanted to write about it. That sort of thing. He got a lot of such things, and reviewers do. If you're a high enough profile reviewer, you will get bombarded with such stuff, unless your review organ, if you are part of a review organ, makes specific efforts to shield you from that kind of mail. Even that won't be successful. Publicists find you, but if you welcome it, then you will get buried in books, and Updike did, and never was without work in hand. Not to the very end of his life. Never. Even when his ridiculous rabbit books took off, even when he was a best-selling author, he still never turned down work like that. Did it all the time. Did it for the whole of his career. And unlike a lot of figures that I talk about on this channel who did that kind of thing, he archived all of his stuff. His publishers immediately set to work producing volume after volume of collected book writing, book reviews, book essays, chats, profiles, prefaces, stuff like that. That didn't happen with Updike. That stuff just went away, and partially I have to hold that to his credit. I'm not particularly fond of doing that, but partially I have to do that. It was egomania, so it wasn't totally to his credit, but at least his egomania was not of the type that said, this work is beneath me, I don't want anyone to see it. Instead, his egomania was of the type that said, anything that I have ever done, thousands of people should read. And although I might find that contemptible, I very much appreciate the end result. I will happily look through probably a dozen of those little pieces of those names on there. But I've had Hugging the Shore before. I got a new copy when it first came out, and I've had other copies that I've just cycled through. In a fit of pique at hating Updike, I've got rid of everything of his, or I've given it to people. That sort of thing. People say, I want to read more book reviews, more little book essays like that, but a lot of them seem, I've had people over the decades say, I want to read more stuff like that, but Edmund Wilson is a little bit formidable. I always say, oh, no, you don't start with Edmund Wilson. Start with V.S. Pritchett, start with Updike, and then just send them the book. So I'm glad to have this again. This will not be going anywhere. I will fuss over it for a bit and then put it on in these shelves here, these 2 bookcases of collected book reviews. Next one is also, it's a novel, and you wouldn't think that I would constantly get and re-get a novel, since I've been pretty vocal on this channel about how silly they are. This one is really good, and it's also by an author who is I have his collected essays, although not his collected book reviews. As far as I know, they are gone. As far as I know, we'll never get them. This is an author who's gone now. No one knows who he is anymore. It's Wilfred Sheed. And this is The Boys of Winter, which let me describe here. This is the perfect comic novel about art, life, and sex in a literary hamlet in the Hamptons, which tells the story of two rivals racing to write the perfect comic novel about art, life, and sex and literary hamlet and literary life in the Hamptons. One of them is Jonathan Oglethorpe, editor assoluto to The Beautiful People, who spends winter weekends at his house in the Hamptons suffering through the bitter drafts and the succession of listless love affairs. The other is his prey and competitor, Waldo Spinks, a dangerously playful novelist who wrote a big war novel 30 years ago and has ever since been ebbing. And as you can tell from that description, this is all about the literary world. And I've read it probably 4 times, and I just think it's fantastic. I'm not an unstinting praiser of Sheed's fiction. His nonfiction is all brilliant, but I'm not universally praising his fiction. But this one works absolutely. And then this next one is from 1999, I think. And I got a copy. I used my employee discount, got a copy when it came out, read all about it, and then got rid of it. And I saw it at the Brattle today and realized that I kind of regretted getting rid of it, so here it is. It's a behemoth. It's the essential Gore Vidal, edited and compiled by Fred Kaplan, his longtime succubus. and it's a big thing. It's not as big as the similar volume that Norman Mailer compiled, but this is Kaplan going through Vidal's gigantic corpus of work and sort of prizing out oysters, prizing out pearls here and there. So you have the whole of, for instance, Myra Breckinridge. I think the whole of Myra Breckinridge is in here. You have the whole of Vidal's play The Best Man. But you have bits and pieces of other things, bits and pieces of historical novels. For instance, where Kaplan would go through and look at, for instance, is there a long digression in a historical novel about religion or about sex or something like that, and he would just sort of prize it out, contextualize it mildly, and put it in here. And one of this book's most acidically bitter critics was, of course, Gore Vidal, who never, ever refrained from biting the hand that feeds him. In fact, an old friend and enemy of his said that was the one diet that Vidal would never go on, is that he would never refrain from biting the hand that feeds him. And even though this was obviously a thing that was going to keep Vidal in the bookstores, it was obviously going to do well, libraries were going to want it, literary clubs were going to want it, completists were going to want it. Nevertheless, I'm not 100% sure. I'm blanking right now. There are better Gore Vidal experts in the world than me. I'm blanking right now on whether or not Vidal ever went public with his scorn for this book. I don't think he ever did. I don't think he ever did. But I could be wrong about that. Either way, the reason that I got this, I mean, the back half of the thing is essays, but I have his United States and I have his Homage to Daniel Shays, and I have a couple of his later essay collections. So, I probably have every essay that's already in here. The reason I got it mainly is because I regretted not having it, and also because it contains lots of stuff by Vidal that I would not buy otherwise. I would never own a copy of Myra Breckinridge. I would never own a copy of his play that he thought was the greatest thing ever written, better play than anything that Shakespeare wrote. And I would never own a copy of any of those things. And this makes it easy. I can just, this is it was always meant to be a browser's delight, and that's what I will use it for. I've also been very hesitant. I mean, I've gone over the fence and back over the years, but right now I don't, for instance, have any of his historical novels except Julian, and I'm not sure that I would. I'm not sure that I ever would. So having those little bits and pieces you're totally at the mercy of what Fred Kaplan thinks thematically, but even so, it's better than nothing, and it might be better than everything as well. So that's why I grabbed this, because this is a perfect example of something that I don't often see in used bookstores. So I saw it at the Brattle, and it was free. All of this stuff I had credit for all of this stuff, so I didn't have to worry about paying for it, and it was certainly worth the grab, so to speak. And then the last of the non-squeal-worthy, the last of the non-fines, is something that, when did this come out? I think I ignored this when it first came out. This came out in 2004. I'm pretty sure that I ignored it. I don't think that I read it. I don't think that I reviewed it. This is by Alice Flaherty, and it's called The Midnight Disease. And the subtitle is The Drive to Write, Writer's Block, and the Creative Brain. And it's all about writing. It's not just historical, but also contemporary, and it's all about the process of writing, the various dysmorphias of writing, the various diseases of writing, problems with writing. And I think I ignored it 10 years ago because for a bad reason, for an unworthy reason. I think I ignored it because most of this stuff doesn't apply to me, and I don't think most of it should apply to anybody who writes. I think most writers like most to complain about writing, and they really ought to slap themselves into shape. It really is. To quote the immortal movie Moonstruck, they should snap out of it. I don't agonize over my writing because writing is not agonizing. Passing a kidney stone is agonizing. Writing is not agonizing. Writing language, your own, no, it's not. I don't agonize over writing. I don't ever strain for words. My English language is under my control. I am fluent in English, so I don't ever strain for words or effect. And I certainly don't ever experience writer's block. Oh my God, don't get me started on writer's block. Oh my. That is I believe, a pure fiction. I think it's a pure fiction. The only reason that I think it exists is because it can exist without consequence, because of the weird social ways we look at writing. An auto mechanic who had auto mechanic block would be out of a job. He wouldn't be considered an auto mechanic anymore. Writer's block has always struck me as a particularly pernicious manifestation of the idea that writing comes from outside the author. Right? It's right there in the word. You're blocked. In other words, there's a sluice gate from the mists of Mount Helion, and ordinarily that sluice gate is open, and the ambrosia of the gods is flowing to you, but not to lesser mortals. But every once in a while, that sluice gate gets blocked. You're blocked. I'm blocked, man. I don't like anything that implies or that gives writers a reason to think that their craft comes from outside themselves. That really bothers me. But not only writer's block, but also the right music to write to, or the right pen, or the right snack, or the right time of day. All of that, any kind of invocation of that kind of crap, is things that writers do to avoid responsibility for their own laziness. Your writing doesn't come from anywhere except you. It can't be blocked. It comes from you. So I think, as you can see, I get animated on the subject. I think that's the reason why I ignored this when it first came out. But that's no good reason. I'm sure that this will fascinate me. And because it was $1, it was easy to gamble on it. And then we're going to talk about the squeals, the finds, the Brattle finds. Not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 Brattle finds. 4. Usually a trip to the Brattle, back when I used to go at least twice a week, 1 Brattle find would be good. And there were plenty of days where I was enthused, I was happy, I was interested in the books I got, but there were no genuine finds. You know what I'm talking about. The genuine find where your eyes light up, you squeal, your hands go wide, and at that moment, no price would be too high for that book. And when it then is accompanied by the book being $1, so much the better. So I have been present for so many people when we go to a used bookstore and they have a find, a genuine find, and it's thrilling. It's thrilling to watch, and it's thrilling to experience, and I got it 4 times here. The first one, something I would have sworn did not exist, and for me to say that, this profoundly slipped under my radar. This is Elliot Maggin, Superman, The Last Son of Krypton. This is a hardcover. Now, I've had this book many times. I have read it many, many times. This is the alleged to be novelization of the great movie, the Salkind Brothers movie. It isn't. I mean, at the time that Maggin wrote this, novelizations of movies weren't really a thing, as the kids say. Not really. The main thing that this was. I mean, the idea was floated to Elliot Maggin that maybe you should tell the story of the movie, but that is not the story in this book. Instead, what the idea was on the part of the studio was, let's have a Superman book in stores when the Superman movie comes out. They didn't really care what the Superman book was about, what the plot of it was. They weren't going to read it. They don't read. They crush people's lives for a living. And the mass market paperback has this cover, and it had a 7-page inset of black and white photos from the movie, and that was it. There was no relationship otherwise. This is a completely different story, a completely better story, but unfilmably expensive by the standard of the 1970s. And I had that mass market. In fact, I still do. Somewhere out in that other room, there is a mass market of this book that we will encounter during our library tour. But I had no idea that had ever been made as a hardcover. This had to be some sort of, I don't know, science fiction book club thing or something or other. I have never seen this in a hardcover. I thought my eyes were deceiving me. I held it up. I found it on the pricing table at the Brattle. I held it up to one of the people who worked there. I've known him since he was a kid, and I said, "But this doesn't exist." And in classic stoic Brattle style, he responded by saying, "Yes, it does. You're holding it in your hand." I think he knew what I meant. They like to razz me at the Brattle. So I am happily going to reread this, even though there is no reason to do so whatsoever. I'm going to reinforce it and reread it. I have a hardcover of Superman Last Son of Krypton. Can you imagine? And that wasn't even the best. The next one is even better. Look at this. Oh my. This is a book compiled by Ralph Waldo Emerson's son. And this is the early years of the Saturday Club, 1855 to 1870. Now, if I remember correctly, Emerson did another volume, a second volume. The Saturday Club was this ad hoc group that came together in Boston in the middle of the 19th century, roughly by chance. That was composed. It was suddenly the literary agents and the booksellers among them realized something that I have maintained forever and ever, and that history is slow to agree with me on, but this history will come around, which is that the Boston of those years, more generously maybe the New England of those years, although the town tended to come to Boston, that the Boston of those years was astonishing. That it was an astonishing assemblage of literary, scientific, social, philosophical, literary criticism, musicology, history, that it was as great an assemblage of talents along those lines as that the world had ever seen. And some of the literary lights of Boston at the time sort of recognized that. These were men and women who were very familiar with history and who suddenly realized, oh wait, the world's most popular poet, two of the world's most popular novelists, three of the world's secondary poets that are recognized everywhere from here to China, two of the world's greatest historians, one of the world's greatest scientists, they all live here. We see them. If I walk down the street, I see them. We know each other. And the idea was to get together regularly. And that became the Saturday Club. And this first volume is a series of profiles of the men who formed that club. As far as I know, Emerson's volumes don't include any women, and of course no women were at those gatherings, but it wasn't quite as blinkered as it sounds. There were a lot of very impressive women in all of the fields that I listed who were known to be impressive by their male counterparts at the time. It was just some of the social sexism you can't avoid at the time. And this has essays by about Louis Agassiz, Richard Henry Dana Jr., let's see, Ralph Waldo Emerson, of course, James Russell Lowell, John Lothrop Motley, who Motley is not known anymore. Most of these names aren't known anymore. Benjamin Pierce, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Oliver Wendell Holmes, that would be Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., William Hickling Prescott, who was a great historian, one of the great historians, John Greenleaf Whittier, now forgotten, Nathaniel Hawthorne. And these pieces are wonderful. They're just wonderful. The Saturday Club limped along for a while. In fact, I think there is still a Saturday Club in Boston. I might even be a member. But I think there still is a Saturday Club. But this was a beast of a different kind. And one of the people who is memorialized in here is Jim Fields, James Fields, who was a publisher and a literary agent, and who ran a great bookstore forever and ever, a little corner bookstore in Boston. If you ever come to Boston, I can show you the spot where it was. There's no bookstore there anymore, but thankfully the building still stands. And there's a wonderful, the profile that's written of Fields has a wonderful bit about when you walked into that store, everybody did. Everybody went there. And as the writer of this profile points out, you got the feeling when you walked in the door that a lot of the customers might also be people whose books you were buying. There was that feeling of the barriers dropping, of it being a really special place. And sequestered off in a corner behind a curtain was Jim Fields' sanctum sanctorum, where he always was. He was always there behind a desk, and he was always talking with people. He would invite writers back there, critics back there, editors back there. and just talk. And if you were elsewhere in the shop, you could hear that talk and the laughter that was coming from behind that curtain. And this author, if I remember correctly, because I've had this book before, I don't know where my copy is, yeah, here it is. What a crowded, busy shop it was, with the shelves full of books and piles of books upon the counters and tables, and loiterers tasting them with their eyes and turning the glossy new pages, loiterers at whom you looked curiously, suspecting them to be makers of books as well as readers. You knew that you might be seeing there in the flesh and in common clothes the famous men and women whose genius and skill made the old world a new world for everyone upon whom their spell lay. Suddenly, from behind the green curtain came a ripple of laughter, then a burst, a chorus, a gay voices of 2 or 3 more, but always of one, the one who sat at the desk and whose place was behind the curtain, the literary partner of the house, the friend of the celebrated circle, which has made the Boston of the middle of this century as justly renowned as the Edinburgh at the close of last century. That curtain corner in the corner bookstore is remembered for those who knew it in great days. What merry peals, what fun and chaff and story! Not only the poet brought his poem there, still glowing from his heart, but the lecturer came from the train with his freshest touches of local humor. It was the exchange of wit, the rialto of common good things, the hub of the hub. And this is that first volume. And this is, I've mentioned before that a lot of times serendipity works in patterns at the Brattle. So I'm really kind of hoping that the second volume that Emerson did will show up. I can't imagine anyone would own this one without owning that one, and I'd like them both. So I will, if I ever go back to the Brattle, I will keep an eye out. But this will be more than good enough. I will spend rapturous hours over this thing, and it also will come into this room. So will the Superman book. And then the next one that I got was a graphic novel. And I never get graphic novels at the Brattle. It's not one of their specialties, so I almost never find one. And I found one today, and not only is it a graphic novel, it's my beloved Legion of Superheroes. A comic book that I have read since its inception, that I have loved since its inception. I have read it and loved it. I am a diehard Legion fan. For those of you who don't know, it's a superhero team of teenagers set 1,000 years in the future. And I follow them in every one of their incarnations, and one of the things about the Legion is that it has fallow periods, and then a really great storyline will happen over the course of a few issues, and then it'll go back to being the normal Legion, and sometimes you'll go 2 or 3 years, and then there'll be another great storyline. That happens in all comic books, but Legion fans are particularly devotional to their great storylines. And if you ask any Legion fan, longtime Legion fan, name me 3 of the great story arcs in the Legion's past. The Legion has had a million adventures, so they will all agree that this is one of them, the Great Darkness Saga, by Paul Levitz, who's one of the great Legion writers, and Keith Giffen, who went on to be another great Legion writer. The premise is very simple, although it caught a lot of us by surprise. The suspense builds really well in the course of these issues. I was totally caught off guard, totally, by the reveal of who the villain was. But the premise is very simple, and disarmingly so, which is that Darkseid, this mad, evil villain that Jack Kirby invented and that plagues superheroes in the 20th century, and who would have been the big, bad Thanos-style villain if the DC cinematic universe had continued as planned. He would have been the big villain that they would all had to face. The idea was very simple, which is that Darkseid could simply live from the 20th century to the 30th century. He might be otherwise occupied, but he could easily be a villain in the 30th century. He could easily fight the Legion. It's not like Lex Luthor, who'd be long dead or something like that. And that's what the storyline is. And it is awesome. It is awesome. Totally, totally wonderful stuff. Does not age. Just recently had a new paperback reprint in bookstores that you will be able to find in your bookstore. This was, I think, the first reprint of that storyline, and I found it at the Brattle. Who knew? And then the last thing that I found was the greatest find of the day, and a large chunk of that time that I talked about, idly lounging in complete peace and comfort on the couch while the summer breeze is blowing through. Large chunk of that time was spent with this book. I have praised this artist many, many, many times, and I will continue to. This is Helen Hokinson, who did cartoons for The New Yorker almost a century ago. And this is the Hokinson Festival, and it is easily twice the size of My Best Girls, which is the other collection of hers that I have. She was a quintessential founding New Yorker cartoonist, and her primary source of inspiration were wonderful, adorable, slightly oversized, and slightly clueless New York City matrons. They're the type of people who have elaborate mansions. They are the type of people who are slightly out of step with the world, and yet wonderful for it, lovable for it. Like, for instance, this one, the one I just showed you, the woman passing around cocktails at a party in her Upper West Side mansion, says, "I'm afraid I've made a perfectly terrible mistake. See if you notice anything." Or this one, a classic one. There we have the ladies all at their well-meaning establishment, their well-meaning civic gatherings, and the caption is, "I just want to say that I'm perfectly willing to serve as treasurer, provided every penny doesn't have to come out exactly even." And so on and so forth. This is the cartoonist who did the cartoon with one of these overfed, elaborately coiffed matrons goes to a greenery and says to the man behind the counter, "I covered them in dirt last fall, and that's the last I've seen of them." Or and many others. A lot of hers are justifiably classics in the annals of New Yorker cartoons, but I've only heard of this thing. I had no idea that I would ever see a copy of it. I routinely go back to My Best Girls. I love it so much. I love her so much, these cartoons so much. And this is 3 times as much of that. And there it was at the Brattle. So that was 4 Brattle finds in a row. And that was my Brattle trip for today. Lots and lots of fun stuff. Lots and lots of distractions from the work that I have to do, but can't get distracted in any better way than that. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.